All right, it's going. All right, cool. We are live. Hi, guys. Welcome to Optizen Thursday Learning Sessions. Today we have Kate and David from SiteSpect who will be helping us understand server-side testing. So before I hand over the mic to them, I want to make sure you guys can hear us. Yes, my phone rings right at that time when we go live. So ignore that and please tell me if you can hear us. Okay. All right. I'll wait for your response. Meanwhile, I'm going to introduce what Optizen Academy is. Those who are new to this session, we do this every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. We bring different topics in digital analytics and experimentation. Uh, and if you are not enrolled in Optizen Academy, you don't have to be a paying member. You can just head over to Optizen Academy and sign up for free session. Yes, Robin, thank you. Robin says you can hear, and Faith, all good. Can hear, great. So head over to Optizen Academy. We have several free sessions like these Thursday ones, as well as other sessions as well that we bring free to you. So you don't have to be a paying member. But if you do decide to take your learning to next level beyond these live sessions, we have extensive courses which will make you data-driven marketer or start a new career in digital analytics. I have done this teaching for pretty much 17 years. So I've been teaching at various universities and colleges, as well as Digital Analytics Association. So I run their programs and corporate training programs. I've done training programs for organizations like Microsoft, help people become more data-driven, how to use data to drive experimentation, personalization, etc. Speaking about personalization and experimentation, we will be talking about experimentation today with Kate and David. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Kate and David and let them introduce who they are and why you should be listening to them. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type those questions in this live chat stream. And this is not a one-way webinar. So your interaction is highly required and appreciated. So stop these guys as they are going through, ask questions, make it as interactive as you would like. We have enough time to cover all your questions and hear them, their point of view. So with that, Kate and David, welcome to Optizen Academy's Thursday learning sessions. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell why should this audience be listening to you? And what are you going to be telling us today?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for the intro. So Dave and I both work for a company called SiteSpect, which is a testing and optimization platform. We're a little bit unique in the landscape, and server-side testing is, really close to our hearts. So it's great to be able to talk to you all about that, what the differences are, the benefits of doing something with server-side and all of that. But I mean, it's quick intros to me. I'm an optimization consultant, so I work directly with our clients and help them run their testing programs and come up with roadmaps and help with analytics, and also a little bit in terms of the technical aspects. But of the two of us, Dave is the technical one, so he covers all of those pieces also with our clients.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm Dave. I've been with SiteSpect for a number of years. I come from a web development background. So as Kate mentioned, I've been involved in testing in creative ways to take your tests as far as you can using SiteSpect. But I before, when I did software development, web development, about 8 years ago, maybe, was the first time I got into A/B testing, split testing, personalization. So I've been immersed in that for the last several years and enjoyed really the power, all the things you can do with testing. all the money you can save and development cycles you can save. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit about me and my perspective.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for both joining this session and teaching us about server-side testing. So let's hear from you. And one more thing for audience here. If you do face any audio issues, then please let me know. And there is a bit of lag in the audio. So by the time you hear Kate and David or me, and it gets to you, there might be like 10, 20 seconds delay. So if you type a question, these guys might have already moved to the next topic, but don't worry, we'll stop them and ask questions. So,
Yep.
right.
Okay.
Kate, do you want me to share?
Yeah. that'd be-
Okay, just one moment. Question is it working?
Yes.
Great.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, so yeah, this is just a splash page. I'll move on. Has our little mug shots. I know my video is not working today. I apologize, but there's a picture of me on this slide.
Stream suck.
Bigger
Yeah.
picture.
Great. Yeah. So this is just high level agenda. You know, just quickly touch on A/B testing. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but you know, from our perspective, what is A/B testing? A little bit about the differences between client side and server side, how server side really works. You know, more technically how it works. What are some of the benefits? You know, what can you do server side that maybe you can't do client side? And then a couple of examples, use cases that we can share with you. A little bit about us. I think we sort of did cover that a bit, and then Q&A.
Yeah, and as Neil said, please feel free to jump in with questions. We'll just pause and address them as we go.
Yeah, Q&A can go throughout the whole thing. Cool. So intro to A/B testing. This is obviously, this could be its own week-long piece, but we're just put it down into one slide. Essentially, you know, A/B testing allows you to compare different experiences and to track behaviors of your real life web visitors, and you know, with the goal of improving conversions and improving the customer experience. So you're seeing actual real life examples of what's happening. You see the people interact with your new features or your different designs and determine which one is more effective. And so, yeah, it helps you validate your ideas and make data-driven decisions instead of just, you know, gut feelings. And as I know, Dave, you've seen this as well, but you know, we've both been testing for a long time, and you don't always get it right. You think, oh my gosh, this one is guaranteed to win, but it usually doesn't, and that's why we test.
Yep.
It's definitely humbling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing is 90+% of your tests might not yield the positive results that you're expecting, right? And that's the whole point of testing, is to figure out whether that's going to work or not. And if people get frustrated, oh, I ran these tests, but nothing is happening. It seems like both test version and control are both doing the same. But that is what you're validating. You're making sure you're not leaving money on the table or opportunities to improve your conversions. And by testing these things, some things work today or might not work today, might work tomorrow. That
Yep.
I've seen that happening as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's a good point. Yep, people change, times change.
Yeah.
Sometimes we recommend that we test something that a hypothesis from a year or 18 months ago, we redo it
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes because, we're in the middle of a pandemic or whatever the case may be, we have different results.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good.
Um,
And
yeah,
also, just because something is working for some other company doesn't mean it works for you and your audience. So it's not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we have clients who have will have sort of different versions of what appears to be almost the exact same site, but because each brand has its own audience, they can run the same test on 3 different brands and get very different results. So
Yeah.
if we knew the answer, we wouldn't test, but don't know the answer most of the time.
Yeah, my favorite line of A/B testing is A means always, B means B, and testing, always be testing. And that came from Brian Eisenberg's book, which he wrote years ago, which is called Always Be Testing. He has a good book on A/B testing. It's an old book, but those who are interested to learn more about stuff he has done, and then how Brian Eisenberg did this testing, I would recommend you check out that book.
that's good. One of the things too that might be worth mentioning here is the iterative nature of testing and how we try not to test too many things at once.
Mhm.
Encourage not too many dimensions. But what is tested, we can take those learnings and roll those back into another iteration. And that way we get much cleaner directional data. And it's still quick. That's one of the great things about testing is it's a quick cycle.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the iterative process is really key, especially when you run something that doesn't do what you expected. So maybe it's just equal to the control, or perhaps it even behaves a little bit worse. You can still learn from it, and what the overall concept might still be a valid one, but you have to tweak the implementation of it a little bit. So that's great. Cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go. Let's go. So essentially, high level, the types of testing that we're talking about, there's client side and there's server side. And we're going to go into more depth for the server side, but for the most part, client side testing is great for testing look and feel, small changes, language, button, call to actions, maybe tweaking the language in your promotions or the designs a little bit, serving different imagery, that sort of thing. And it's also, client side is also really great for making changes to dynamic content. So whether your whole website is a single page app or there's just certain sections where content is pulled in dynamically, client side obviously will help you make changes to those pieces. Server side, on the other hand, really, at the high level, it allows you to serve an experience to the end user as if that is the experience from the from the server. So you're not making any changes after it gets to the browser. You get the experience you get is what you get, which means that you can test some really big things. So release testing is very common. Before you just roll out a release, you can sort of test it out, and it makes it easy to pull back if for some reason it's not working. You don't have to have these fire drills. You can just kind of pause the test and fix what you need to. But it also really allows you to target anything that is integral into the back end of your program. So search algorithms, checkout, a whole new redesign, or just a new version of your site. All of those things, you need all of the little pieces to work together. It's not just a visual change. If you have a different search algorithm, it's not just having a blue button or the placement of your search bar. It's really what products are going to come back and what order are they going to come back in. And that's, that's way beyond the visual look and feel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'd like to add just a bit of maybe clarification. When we talk about client side versus server side, the results, I guess this is maybe obvious, but just to make sure, are all on the client or on the web browser, wherever you're testing. It's just there's a technology layer in terms of where we decide to use what. And as you can imagine, like a single page app or something that's dynamically changing the DOM, all the content on the page without going back to the server, that's what we would use a client side hook for. But SiteSpec's a little bit unique in the space that we have probably some more server side tools available that we can delve into here.
Yeah, and maybe just for the clarity of audience here, right? Many of them are used to client-side testing if they are doing any A/B testing. And are you going to go through and show the differences, like what really means server-side testing?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If not, then I was going to say, let's clarify that for them. Like, how client-side testing, when page already loads and you're swapping out the elements. That's what most of the testing, whether people coming from Google optimized background, or Optimizely or other stuff that they're doing, they're basically looking at these server-side changes, client-side changes where you're swapping out the content. Server-side testing, on the other hand, happens on the server, right? So I don't want to steal your slides here, but yeah, great. This is what I was talking about. So I'll let you guys talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. We can get into this. There's a slide after this. It's probably a good one, but where we can do things on the server, whether it's redirects or actually changing content on the page source. And I'll defer back to Kate here.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously.
So I'm going to stop you right here. Any audience is clear on a client-side testing, right? You guys are familiar with it, on how it works. If not, feel free to jump in and ask questions and we'll clarify that for you. This is a learning session, so where you can learn the difference in these two and also see like how SiteSpecs will help you with the server-side testing and why you should think about server-side testing as well. But there are use cases for client-side testing. Not everything you want to do from server-side, it can work, but it's much more involved process as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an overlap.
Yeah,
where you could do a similar kind of thing in both spaces, but some things that we'll get into here, with the architecture, you can do before or on the way back from the server. And so actually, if you're looking at this chart here, this diagram, it shows SiteSpec is configured similar to how you might think of a CDN configuration in your network path, which makes it a bit unique. And as a result, using the SiteSpec control panel, you as a user, developer or user of it, you're able to set up instructions to happen as the request goes out and before it gets to the origin web server and on the way back. So you can do things in both places, and there's reasons for what to do where, which we'll get into here on the next slide. And Kate, am I missing anything on this?
Well, I think maybe stay on this one for just 1 second, one more second. So exactly as you described, you can make signals and make changes on the request and the response. But in the way we think about it, regardless of whether it's on the request or the response, both of those are still really considered server-side testing, in that all of the changes are made before it gets to the browser. So what's delivered to the browser is the final experience. And whereas the client side, once it's loaded in the browser, then it might make more changes after the fact. But for both of these types of server-side testing, the request and as Dave said, our next slide goes into those types in a little more detail. But all of that is made before it gets to the end user's browser.
Cool.
That,
Yeah, I got two comments here. Robin, yes, clear on that. I think Robin is talking about the client-side A/B testing. And I might not be able to say this name correctly, but Zwickham Borrero. Personally, I have an idea how client-side testing works, so that's great. And we'll get into some more details. So any questions you have, feel free to type in here.
it's definitely great.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I could mention just another maybe concept here that could be potentially easily visualized in this. So as Kate said, server side happens. You can use SiteSpec to signal things to happen from the origin server. So the origin server returns a different experience based on, let's say, a cookie or a header. You can have SiteSpec make changes in the flow to the page source on the way back, for example, or do redirects like 301, 302, or internal redirects. And then if you can imagine what SiteSpec does in a client side mode is it imprints the page with instructions on what to change once it gets to the browser. So hopefully that helps kind of distinguish the difference.
Cool.
Cool. So these are sort of the three main types of server-side changes that you can make, tests that you can run, which I know we sort of alluded to all of these, but we can spell them out here. So the feature flag type of testing, this is done on the request, and this is what Dave was just talking about, where you're literally flagging the origin to return either a slightly different experience, or perhaps like a whole, it might direct them to a whole different set of code if you're doing a release test or something. But this can also flag that, flag your origin to say, okay, use our vendor A or vendor B. So vendor bake-offs are a pretty common one that we see a lot, and you can really test different, completely different vendors for things like search or reviews or recommendations and that sort of thing. So typically we'll use a cookie or a header value to signal to the origins that the origin just has sort of a, if this, then that logic built in, and then it will return the correct experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I thought maybe we could pause to see if
about
that.
There is a question or comment maybe. I guess server-side testing, this is Vivek. I guess server-side testing may require more coding efforts compared to client-side testing.
Not necessarily. Sometimes less. So it depends, like in this feature flag type of scenario, you are using SiteSpec to be the signaling traffic cop, or the send a signal or feature flag to your origin. And then from the perspective of having the guys or the people do coding in the background to make this happen on the origin server, yeah, it could require some coding. It's either going to require some coding in your managed code. So I guess the answer is probably, or maybe, depending on how complicated.
Depends on what you're trying to do, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And feature flag, as we were mentioning, can also be used for like a full feature for release testing or something like that, where you've already built out the code, so it's not really all that much more, but you have the benefit of you have the benefit of risk mitigation, because if your new release has a bug in it, you can roll it back really easily and prevent all your users from having this bad experience. But even if there's no bugs and it's good, you can also just really measure how well it's performing. And you can say, hey, this new release we pushed out, this actually got us a 1% increase in sales. So you can even just start to keep track and really quantify all of the changes you're making, which is great just for, morale even, and just being able to keep track of all that. So,
yeah, I mean, on the flip side, we've had huge risk avoidance stories
oh yeah,
by
so
doing this. I mean, there's, I think if folks that are online may have heard more than once, where developers are so confident that this new architecture is going to be better, everyone's going to like it better. That's why you test.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, we have so many experiences like that with our clients, where they've spent months or years building out a whole new mobile site, or like a whole new PWA site, and there's no way it could be worse. Like, of course it's better. We've spent so much time, and we've put so much effort into it, and then start testing it, and it's not necessarily better, but ultimately we get there, and that also goes back to the iteration. So you can start tracking, as long, I strongly feel that your test is only as good as your metrics, which I feel like this group probably appreciates. And so, if you're tracking all of the behaviors on your site, and you can start to figure out where something might not be lining up as you expected, why you're seeing, a lot fewer product pages or something. And, so it really helps you, compare, and it helps you figure out where you should go next. So even when something loses, you're learning so much about your test and the idea, and even your customers. You learn which things, sometimes you make these huge changes and you think there's no way it will fail, and it's just sort of flat, and you say, even though it looks visually different, it doesn't change anyone's behavior, and you learn that too, and you start to figure out which are the elements on your website that actually move the needle.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a few comments, and I'm going to come back to you with a few questions of my own here. So Irvin says to Vivek, which is regarding the server-side testing may require more coding. That's the question Vivek asked. And Irvin's response is, it may seem so, but it could also prevent stacking code on code, which may be very inefficient. So it's basically, rather than coding everything, you're using server-side to test out things. So you're not overloading your code. That's what I think.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Tashi, for server side, can we totally depend on any tag management tool, or it requires developer inputs? So maybe it's the technical side of how server-side testing works. Can we use tag management solution to do that, or does it require developers to do certain things?
You want me to answer, Kate, or?
You can jump into that one, Dave.
I'll jump in and you can add whatever. So from the server side, because if you go and look at this graph again real quickly here, that this diagram does show that ServerSide can see the traffic flowing. So when we create server-side metrics, they tend to be extremely accurate because there's no tag misfires.
Mm-hmm.
And they're super easy to set up. You just say match on this URL, and maybe you say when the page source contains something. Now, to talk about third-party integrations, which we do all the time, with like Adobe or Google Analytics or whatever, we have an integration that's really pretty straightforward. It's called WATS, and Kate might be able to remember the acronym, Web Analytics, but it's a really easy way to push campaign IDs and variation group IDs that folks are getting in SiteSpec into your third-party analytics, so you can compare, the two. But we encourage our clients to use both if they have them, because SiteSpec really can give you a lot of insights, and when you set up the Watts integrations, it's a one and done. Once you set it up, it flows. So it's something that we do for our clients all the time, and sometimes it's as short as an hour's worth of work or something.
Yeah. And Speaking of that developer management and how integration works, I have worked with many companies where they have internal tools. They develop their own tools, right? So where server side spec can do this many things for you. If you have a large team of developers and who are putting this, you might be creating your own application or built-in system for A/B testing. And that time, developers are heavily involved in the whole process because you're putting the hooks. It's part of your product, how you release your features, etc. So it also depends on the organization, how they're involved or what they're using, right?
I think that's definitely true. And also in terms of the developer involvement, if we sort of go into the other two types of server-side tests, they become less dependent on developers. So feature flags really, inherently, you do need some developers because they're building something different on your own servers.
Yep.
They might be building it anyway in the case of like a release test, but they're certainly involved. As we get into these other two, so redirect and then search and replace is even less involved. But let me hop over to redirect for a second, unless you wanted to.
I have two comments before you go there. So one thing you mentioned in the feature flag or new product or features release, right? You're testing something that you have built. Now, one of the benefits, and this is a question one of the benefits that is always cited for like experimentation, other than, you don't want to release something that'll totally, tank your business, right? You want to test it out. And the other thing is also, hey, it's cost effective to do that. Well, cost depends on how you define cost, right? If you're already built a product, features, everything, there's already sunk cost there. You've already gone that route. And now you're testing, like you mentioned, hey, somebody created this whole change in mobile app or whatever they were releasing. Kate, you mentioned something about that, right? So in that, you've already spent so much money and time building that to only find out later by testing that thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what do you tell your clients in those scenarios? Like, what's the right approach? Should you go build? Should you go piece by piece? I've seen where changes do need to happen, right?
Yeah.
And go ahead, then I'll put in.
I was going to say this is the kind of conversation we have all the time. So it's definitely close to my heart. As you just said, sometimes there are changes that have to happen. They're dictated by other parts of the organization, or for whatever reason you have to make some changes, and you just go ahead and you have to do that. It's still good to test it so that you can then iterate and make sure it's as as effective
Right.
as possible.
Yeah.
But for these really big projects, we always encourage our clients that sometimes they listen to us and sometimes they don't, but we always encourage our clients to try to test as many of the components ahead of time as possible. So especially something like a whole new redesign. Let's try to test some of these pieces. If your redesign is removing the quick shop functionality on your site, that's something that we can easily test ahead of time with the same design, and say, well, what happens if we remove quick shop? Are your customers going to, obviously their behavior is going to have to change somewhat. There'll probably be more product page views, but ultimately, does it help them or hurt them in terms of finding what they want and converting? So yeah, we definitely try to test as much as we can ahead of time. As you said, there are times when certain changes have to be made. We can't really test it before, but
yeah. And one of the things I just wanted to highlight, because this is such an important point, right? There is industry moves or whatever vertical industry you guys are in, like when you're testing on your site app. and that industry is moving, or the whole space is moving in certain direction, right? Bigger fonts, for example, everybody's using bigger fonts, darker backgrounds, lighter backgrounds. They always put the hamburger menu on top, those things. And everybody is moving in that direction, and then you also want to change your experience to make sure it aligns with whatever the whole industry is going. But that might mean your audience will react in a different way, because as Kate and Dave mentioned early on, your audience is different, right? So something that works on somebody else's site might not work on your site or app. In those scenarios, but you still want to move forward. And then when you move forward with this, you can release, you can test, you can make minor tweaks to make sure whatever your new uh, feature is or new experience is, it at least comes in par with how you were functioning prior to that. So that's a good way to do server-side testing, because you have these feature flags which you can easily turn on and off, and also make changes on the code that gets pushed out. So
yeah, that's a really good point. And at least with SiteSpec, you can also combine a lot of these changes. So you could have a feature flag that makes the bulk of it, and then maybe some of these search and replace to tweak things here or there to determine what the best role is.
Another point I want to make about the metrics. You mentioned, Kate, about the importance your test is as good as your metrics, right? So that's another critical point, is because it's very important to understand that and understand your metrics. What are you trying to achieve before you start testing these things? I've seen this mistake made over and over again. Okay, let's test it. We'll figure out what the data comes across, and then we'll figure out whether the test is successful or not. Wrong approach.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
So often, I mean, we'll have basic metrics included, but it's just so often if you don't have the hypothesis and the questions worked out, you just might not even have the right metrics, which means you have to rerun the test.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So very critical point in metrics. Spend a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time with my clients trying to understand what the metrics is, because different people, stakeholders in the same organization, even in the same department or group, have different ideas about what the metrics is. Hey, what about clicks on this, or conversion? Well, what is a conversion for you? Those kind of things. It takes a lot of time. So define all sorts of metrics, but pick the one that's critical for you to do this test. So I just wanted to call that out, because you mentioned those two things. We need to make sure people are aware of how critical those things are.
I mean, to your point, if you always, if you err, if you will, on the side of having more metrics than you need, you're not hurting anything.
Yeah, no, it's super critical. And as Dave alluded to, having the hypothesis worked out as well.
Yep.
So why are we even testing this? Why do we think this might work? As we know, we're not always right, but have we seen past behaviors to indicate that this would be this would be effective? And also, I think in terms of the metric, just one more piece. One thing I find a sort of a misstep that a lot of my clients will make is especially around new features. And so they have this new feature, like maybe it's a new way to put together like a Pinterest style mood board, or maybe they're adding the ability for their customers to comment or put in their own imagery or something like that, upload pictures, anything that's new, or like a finder to help someone find what they want. What I see as a pitfall is the KPIs that they choose are basically just interactions with that new feature. And certainly it's interesting to know how your customers are interacting with it, but that's really not going to tell you if it wins or not, because if your control version doesn't have it and your variation group has something, well, you can't really compare a metric when it just doesn't even exist in one. So I always tell my clients to keep backing up. I mean, those are good to track for sure. It's interesting. You want to know that, but keep sort of stepping back until you get to a place that is on par for all of your groups. So if you're putting in a new widget that helps your customers find content, you don't necessarily want to just measure interactions on that widget, but you want to measure views to the content. Are people finding the content? So something like that.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why defining these metrics takes time, right? Understanding you don't, want to pick something and then not have a way to compare them.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Were there any other?
No questions. Right.
We could talk briefly if you wanted, Kate, about the search and replace functionality in terms of making changes there, or.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll touch on the redirect briefly, and then you can go into search. So in terms of back to that whole question of developer involvement, redirect is one that can kind of go in different ways in terms of how much developer involvement is needed. But some of the cool things you can do with redirects are if your company has a CMS and you're able to make your own version of a page, like you can make 3 different versions of it, and you can just do that in your own system on your own. You can leverage redirects to flag which one you want to see, and you might do that. Might be a whole new URL. It might be a query parameter, as we mentioned here. But what's great is that you don't necessarily need a developer to build out the new page. A lot of times there's functionality that you can leverage. Also, a lot of times we find that depending on the type of page, they're already different. You can use query parameters to trigger different behaviors that are already built in to your tool. So, if you're showing a list of products in a grid, or a list, or big pictures or little pictures, a lot of times that functionality is actually it works by having a query parameter in the background. You might be switching it in the UI, but then it uses a query parameter to signal what to show. And so you can a lot of times add those query parameters in the redirect on the request so that it's automatically going to pull back the correct layout or the correct version before it even gets to the browser.
Yep.
Kate, to what you were saying also, some of our clients test a completely new version of a homepage.
Yes.
And they use a completely different URL. And there's a feature that's in SiteSpec that allows you to do an alternative proxy setting where you can actually map it and hide it. So you go to yoursite.com, your new URL is something completely different, but it's masked. And that's kind of the way an internal redirect works on in our product anyway.
Good point, masking the URLs. Thanks for bringing that up, Dave, because that is really important. If you're doing a whole new homepage or a new version of all of your product pages or your checkout, you don't necessarily want people to be able to tell that they're in some different experience by looking at the URL.
So in that page name has got a V2 after it or something, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that darn it, I'll tell you, that really affects people's perception. So that can be an artifact that kind of impacts your data in a negative way if they're looking at a funny URL.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify. So people will still see the same URL, right?
Yeah,
yes.
But they get
different experience. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, one of the things that we always run into is and this is different between client side, server side, right? But redirect, if you're doing a client-side redirect, then you'll see some kind of redirect happening sometimes. And also the experiences that we're loading. Right now, we're running into with one client. I'm not going to name the tool we're using, but it's a client-side tool. And it's the flickering is very visible, right? You go in and you see a certain price or promotion that's happening, and
Oh,
right in
cool.
your eyes, it just switches to the next one.
Yeah,
And
Yeah, where
not
did that,
ideal.
where did that other promotion?
yeah.
It's also really slow. So just briefly here again, you can specify SiteSpec to make the redirect on the request, which is going to be the most performant. You can also, there's a different kind of redirect that could be made on the response, and the only time you would use that would be if you want to make an evaluation whether or not you want to redirect based on the page source, because you know obviously on the
Mhm.
request you haven't seen the source yet. But anyway, I won't talk too much about the specifics there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep.
Great. So I think we could probably move to search and replace unless you see any questions about redirects.
Yep. No new questions. Yeah. We can move to the next one. Yeah.
Dave, you
Guys, feel
wanna-
free to type in your questions here, anything that you want clarification on, or even if you have any comments on what's being discussed here. So your experience, if you have any, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. Okay, Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, I thought I would tell the story about the e-commerce client in particular that we worked on maybe a year and a half ago or sometime, where we did a really big product, a PDP, product detail page redesign. And we did the development, the changes we set up in SiteSpec, so in the control panel. So, but they were changing the page source before it actually hit the client's browser. So it was really seamless, so that nobody was the wiser that, you know, it wasn't coming from the server like that, from the origin server. And Kate will remember the numbers much better than I will, but I think it was some number of millions of dollars that they saw an increase in conversion based on that. And that just really confirmed that they wanted to have their development team implement these changes permanently. And also, I wanted to touch on that even though clients will spend some time, let's say with us, or they'll with their own developer to implement some major changes in a client or in a search and replace type of variation, it still ends up being oftentimes very cheap compared to engaging the developers on the managed code side. So we're able to move much quicker in the SiteSpec tool than you know, scheduling their traditional managed code processes to make changes.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah.
that was a good one. And then just also to make sure it's super clear, with search and replace, we're literally looking through, SiteSpec is literally doing, like if you were in Microsoft Word and doing a find and replace, it's like that for the source code. Obviously we can take advantage of, you know, pattern matching and stuff like that. So it's more robust than just, you know, or Microsoft Word find and replace, but that's really essentially what it is. So we're seeing that source code and we're saying, okay, find this and replace it with this. You can insert completely new sections this way, and move stuff around. And you can make a lot of different combinations of changes together.
Yeah. In that case, we did a bunch of variations within the variation group. One was like, we're going to inject some new CSS for our new elements. Another one was we injected some JavaScript to, you know, capture clicks and to do other things to, you know, manage the new experience. And then the rest of it was search and replace in the content itself.
Yep.
Cool.
That was a great one. It was definitely one where, you know, there was a lot of time to build it out within SiteSpec, but given, as you were talking about, where your resources, where do you have available resources? You know, they didn't have the available resources in their development side. So able to test it out first And then once you've confirmed that, hey, this is really a great new design for the product detail page, then there's obviously a much more compelling argument internally to get your project up to the top of the list in the developers world.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, they weren't ready for a while, so they applied that to 100% of traffic once they did the
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
Promoted it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I mean, I'm sure most people are familiar with the process, but the way we do it, and probably most people do it, is you do your A/B test, and let's say you run it for 6 weeks, and you're definitely proved that this is a huge win. Then you promote it to 100% of traffic until your dev team can get it done.
Correct. Yep. Cool. Any questions? Nope. No questions.
Great. Great. So, I mean, I think we've probably talked about a lot of these benefits along the way, but just sort of to recap, some of the real great things about server-side testing is that you are testing not just the visuals, which are obviously important too, but not just visuals, but how it actually works. So how it functions on back end, which third-party integrations are you inserting, which search algorithms are you using, what all of these pieces, really how it functions, which is really key to your whole site. It means that you're measuring everything that you push out, and you're not just crossing your fingers and hoping that something is going to be great. And when you have the inevitable arguments between people, I think this one's better, I think this one's better. I was a UX designer for 10 years before working with SiteSpec, and that's all we did all the time. We just argued with each other about what we thought was best. So you just test it, you put it out there and see which works. So, take some of that guesswork out. And yeah, you can fail fast. As you said, it depends on what you're testing, but especially if you can use some of the sort of self-serve features, whether it's a CMS on your side or search and replace within, a tool like SiteSpec or, whatever your testing tool is. A lot of times you can make changes a lot quicker than having it go through a whole development cycle and have to wait for a release and all of that. So you can get a lot of learnings, a lot of, really quickly, and then iterate upon that. And then as we talked about it's delivering the experience before it gets to the browser. So it's all there. You don't have that flicker that you're seeing with one of your clients. It's just there. And then, yeah.
That flicker really can impact your data. We've seen it happen before. If you have, flicker or artifacts where the page comes in a really odd way, people tend to not like it, and you don't know whether they didn't like how it was delivered or they didn't like the experience.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it also adds to users' perception of page is taking longer to load. Those little things do impact on the results. Like, when we're testing, or people generally tend to, or the teams that are working generally don't think like, hey, this is going to make a big impact or not. But those minor things have a huge impact. I've seen studies, and there are different point of views where people are talking about the color changes or like a minor pixel changes. That's not going to impact, but they do have impact. And in this case, where your page loads and all of a sudden things start to change,
Yep.
that creates a weird experience for users. And then, and at that time, they're like, should I be trusting this site or not? Is this my browser hijacked at this point because it's getting replaced? So those are the kind of things that you have to watch out. Now, there is a place for, client-side testing if you can work through those issues, but server-side testing takes that out of the equation.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I see that on sites all the time, even when they're not necessarily testing, but they're just loading things in chunks. I feel like I'm always clicking on something when I see it, but then something loads before and I end up clicking on the wrong thing because everything
Yeah.
has changed the spot. So yeah, all of these things can really make a difference. And it's interesting how you said the perception of something like speed. We have seen that as well, where some, two versions might actually take the same amount of time, but there is for various reasons, there's a perception that one is slower.
Yep.
And so how can you manage that as well? And we, not all of our clients will use these types of metrics, but we do encourage them to have metrics that measure like page load speed, and even I kind of like to see page abandonment. So how many of your visitors are leaving a page before it fully loads? Like how many of them are basically giving up? And that sometimes is a good indication of this, perception of slowness.
Yeah, on this page speed, there is actually a very famous test done by a team at Microsoft with Ronnie Kohavi, who has written a book on this subject as well. And I used to work in his team over at Microsoft where A/B testing was done across Microsoft. So he built his own platform there. And one of the things in his studies, which is actually out there, and I can drop a link to that study, which talked about the server speed, like even fraction of seconds difference. I think it was like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was very small, detectable. The human eyes cannot even detect that change, but it did have an impact on their conversion, on their revenue.
Yeah, I'm
So it
sure.
was such minor, like it said. I think what he said in the study is even if I assign one developer all year long to just fix and change the page speed by few milliseconds, I think that developer's cost will come from that change alone. So it's that huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
matter.
So those perceptions, even though you can't detect when you are consciously looking at those, but those subconscious mind comes into play and you're basically looking at those uh, or perceiving those changes, they can impact how whether you'll interact or buy from that site or not, or click on certain elements or not.
Definitely. I think we even had Dave. I don't know if you remember this one. Yeah, you can move on, but I'll just in the interlude. I think we even had a client who was trying to test page speed, but we were actually artificially slowing down their page
Yeah,
in
to see
increments.
the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what these guys did in that test. I think it was
I remember one of our clients, they changed, I think we did a global search and replace on their page source for pointing to a new CDN for image loads, and that made a big difference. It's that kind of thing where, yeah, that I guess falls into the server side test as well.
cool.
So I was going to hop over to a couple of use cases that we had.
Is this a good time still to move into the use cases?
Yeah. We
Okay.
can. There are no more questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, guys, if you have any questions, type them, and feel free to type them here.
Cool. Yeah. So this was from one of our clients who was trying to increase credit card applications, and what they were doing was to actually give an incentive where you don't pay the tax if you apply for this credit card. You're not going to pay the taxes, and not obviously they're paying the taxes in the back end, but this one is, I think, really a great example of server-side test because client side, you could certainly put up a banner to show this promotion. You can change some of the text and the verbiage to make people want to do this, and you can do all of those visuals on the on the client side, but in the end, you have to make sure that your checkout flow actually charges the right amount. And so you can't really just do this client side because at the end of the day, you have to tell the back end to charge a different amount, and you can't really do that. So I think this is a great example of why you really need, a lot of times you really do need your tests to be tied in directly with all of your other built-in features and all this that gets calculated.
Yeah. Yeah. Setting something up like this on the client side will take a lot of effort. Somebody was talking about, like, people have been talking about developers. This is where I think you'll need more developer resources on the front end to make those changes. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
But it's, can potentially be worth it. And, oftentimes you can maybe test some of these, like the concept of it ahead of time, just to gauge interest. But then obviously the real implementation, you have to work with all of your processes. Otherwise, someone's going to say, "Oh, great, I'm going to check out," and then they get charged the wrong amount. So that's never good. But for this test specifically, I mean, we have the results down here, but it was really, really big lifts overall. Obviously, engagement was some of the credit card applications went up, which is not a surprise. But and that was really the goal. They were trying to get more credit card applications, but overall, it resulted in a higher average order value and over $700,000 of additional revenue. So it was huge. Not only did this client get for credit card applications, which they wanted, but they got more revenue overall. So those win-wins.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know. There's questions about that one, or
there are no questions. Actually, I have one question. So in this case, what were they testing? So I get the whole idea about the integration, but what specifically was, maybe I missed that portion. I was looking at questions here as well.
Yeah.
So were they testing like just the banner or call outs on the site, or what were they?
Yeah, it was in, I think there were some banners across the site, but it was mostly in the cart and the checkout flow.
Okay.
And it was,
so it was after people have already kind of made up their mind to buy it, or was there, I'm just trying to think, like, how did they drive more or awareness of this offer? Like, apply for this credit card and get this,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there was messaging across the site.
Okay.
But the messaging was the strongest in the cart.
Okay.
And then it flowed through into checkout.
Got it. Okay. Cool. All right. Any questions? No questions. Do you have any other example, or this is the last one?
We have another one. There we go.
Okay.
I think this is the last one.
This is the last one. All right.
Yeah. So this one, I think I mentioned before that we do a lot of vendor bake-offs. And so that's what we call them, but really testing different vendors against each other. So it can be recommendation vendors or search providers. In this case, it was a rating and review. I believe this customer initially had just kind of like built their homegrown kind of ratings and reviews, and they were testing out an actual vendor to see if it's worth using them. So this was a combination. They were both testing this new vendor and then also making some changes in terms of the visual display of it and all that. So there's, this had a lot of different things going on, but it was definitely it's always a fun one, I think, when we do the vendor bake-offs. For me, I find it really fun because we are sort of this impartial third party, and I don't really have a preference as to which one wins, so it's fun. It's just really fun to see see how it play out. But yes, this was making the reviews a lot more prominent and making them easier to collect and more dynamic to display, and all of those great things that come along with the vendor, as opposed to something that's pretty basic when they built it themselves. This had so the test ran. So all of these, we have this 16 to 30 days, we have these buckets so that we have consistency. So it ran for a few weeks basically. And just within that period of time, the variation group made $56,000 more just during that time. And so, then we have projected revenue, which includes, obviously a vendor is going to cost money, so you have to pay for that. So the ROI based on that, but essentially this was a pretty big win for them, and it's one less thing that they have to manage on their own, and it was clearly a positive experience overall for their customers. So
cool.
All
right. No questions. All right. I'll wait. I'll give them a few seconds to ask any questions. And if you guys don't have any questions right now, or but you come up with those questions later, feel free to leave them as comments, and I'll make sure Kate and Dave gets to see those questions and answer them. So thank you guys. Thank you very much. This was very helpful. I think looking at, or hearing your point of view on things that you have tested and how you have approached testing is really helpful, and learning about the benefits of server-side testing. That was very clear during this conversation, and thank you for the case studies as well. That puts, all these things in, visual format, or kind of where you can connect the dots. So that's really helpful. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions that come up, I'll let you know, and so that you can answer those questions. Is there anything that if there is any other white paper or anything that you think users will benefit from, send me that link and I'll add that in the comments or the description of this video as well.
Yeah,
guys, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, which I'm sure you did, so give it a thumbs up to this video, and make sure to also subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next session, which is next Thursday. So, I don't know what the topic will be, but it'll be announced. So make sure to sign up for that. I got so many topics, I'm always confused, like what's coming up next. But we have every week, we have a new topic covering digital analytics, experimentation, personalization, and using the data to make better customer experience, and driving more revenue and conversions. So thank you, Kate. Thank you, David.
Take care. Thanks.
Yeah.